Even though the slate for week 2 wasn't as strong and stacked as week 1, last week it was still a very great and exciting week of college football. We had games going into overtime, double overtime. We had the upset of the season, South Florida going on the road to Gainesville and upsetting Florida with a last-second field goal. We also had some of the top teams sleepwalking in their matchup. What does Week 3 have in store for us? I am Johnny Sports Network, here to provide you with my Week 3 college football predictions and our main 7 for this week. Wisconsin and number 19 Alabama, Vanderbilt and number 11 South Carolina, number 12 Clemson and Georgia Tech. Florida begins their challenging and daunting schedule on the road in Baton Rouge against number 3 LSU. Number 18 South Florida, they look to make it 3 consecutive weeks of upsetting a ranked team. They go on the road to take on number 5 Miami. Number 16 Texas A&M and number 8 Notre Dame. And as always, we conclude with the game of the week. And this week's game of the week, number 6 Georgia and number 15 Tennessee. Without further ado, let's get to the Week 3 college football predictions right here on the Johnny Sports Network. We begin with Wisconsin and number 19 Alabama. All eyes were on Alabama going into last week in their matchup against Louisiana Monroe. And there was an interest to see how Alabama would respond after losing their season opener in week 1 on the road against Florida State. And they ended up winning 73-0. And this was without wide receiver Ryan Williams, who is in the concussion protocol still as of this moment. No word on his status yet. And it was also without starting running back Jam Miller, who is yet to play this season. But there is anticipation that he is expected back by the Georgia game in a couple of weeks. But there hasn't been an official announcement on if he will be playing in this game or not. And for Wisconsin, going into this season, I felt like Luke Fickell was the number 1 head coach on the hot seat, who needed to have a good season. And going into Tuscaloosa and upsetting Alabama, it would be massive for Luke Fickell, as I do anticipate if Wisconsin, if they don't win 6-7 games, I think they will part ways with him. So far this season, Wisconsin's only allowed 5 points per game. But their 2 opponents so far this season have been Miami, Ohio, and I want to say Middle Tennessee, but I don't remember at this moment. And they're 3rd in total defense. But despite the response last week by Alabama, we still need to see this Alabama team bounce back against better competition. No question that Wisconsin isn't the same team that they were 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But Wisconsin is still better competition than Louisiana Monroe. And I think Alabama, they easily win this game by 3-4 touchdowns. And as of this moment, Alabama is favored by 20.5 points. So I do have Alabama covering in this game comfortably. Vanderbilt and number 11 South Carolina. Vanderbilt was one of the most talked about teams in the offseason. And the main reason for that was quarterback Diego Pavia being outspoken all offseason long. He made statements calling out Alabama, saying they're going to beat Alabama again. He talked about how Vanderbilt is going to win the SEC, win the national championship. And after watching the Week 2 matchup against Virginia Tech, a Virginia Tech team that I did mention that I did like the effort they had against South Carolina Week 1, they stayed in that game for most of the duration of that game, but it was the punt return that changed the entire game. Virginia Tech, once again, they did show competitiveness against Vanderbilt, but then Vanderbilt, that is where things started to turn. They scored 34 unanswered points on Virginia Tech, and Vanderbilt ended up dominating the second half to win that game. And after 2 games of the 2025 season, Vanderbilt, they find themselves 25th in total offense, averaging just over 485 yards a game, 6th in total defense, only giving up just under 191 yards a game. And for South Carolina, LaNorris Sellers, I want to see him be more accurate, not only in this game, but the rest of the season moving forward. As South Carolina, they were a team that also got a lot of hype in the offseason, talking about how South Carolina, they are a playoff contender this season. As South Carolina, they just missed out on the playoff last season. A loss against LSU, and it was a very controversial game. A 2-point loss against Alabama, and I'd argue if one thing went differently in either of those games, South Carolina wins, and maybe they would have made the playoff last season. But LaNorris Sellers was talked about as a Heisman contender. Only 337 passing yards so far this season, only completing 60.5% of his passes. South Carolina's offensive line has allowed 6 sacks so far this season. I do think in this game, South Carolina does win. However, given what I have seen against both teams against Virginia Tech is, in my opinion, a good sample for both of these teams. I think Vanderbilt actually covers in this game, and I think South Carolina only wins by a single field goal. As I'm not completely sold on South Carolina yet, but if LaNorris Sellers was to have a 350-yard passing game and 3-4 touchdown passes, then I do think I will be able to be sold on South Carolina, but just not yet. I think South Carolina wins this game, but only by 3 points. Number 12, Clemson and Georgia Tech. And when I looked at this matchup back in the offseason, I thought this may seem like a potential trap game for Clemson. It's their first road game of the season. They're playing a Georgia Tech team that has shown multiple times that they have the capability of pulling off an upset. It just depends on which Georgia Tech team shows up on game day. Today, I still feel like that could be the case, but I'm not certain on it being a trap game, as we don't know about the status of Haynes King for sure. He did not play in the game last week against Gardner-Webb. I do think part of it was more precautionary, as they knew that Gardner-Webb essentially was a scrimmage game, and to keep him rested for Clemson in the next game. As Haynes King was the difference maker in week 1 against Colorado, and if he's not at 100%, keep him out for the Gardner-Webb game and give him rest for the Clemson game next week. And this is under the assumption that Haynes King does play in this game. I am leaning towards him playing. But if he is ruled out for the game, expect this 4.5-point spread to go up to nearly double digits. I think if Georgia Tech can just play clean football in this matchup, they have a strong chance to win. Clemson, they were one of those teams last week who were sleepwalking through their week 2 matchup. They trailed Troy 16-3 at the half. They did, however, take care of business in the second half. But in these first 2 games so far this season, I really should say more the second half against LSU, where they were shut out in the second half, and the Troy game, I feel like that Clemson, they have not shown their full potential yet, which is why I'm not going to be surprised if Haynes King does play in this game, if Georgia Tech pulls off the upset. But I don't think it's going to happen, though. I just feel like it's only a matter of time until Clemson, they start to show that true potential. I feel like they showed a little bit of it in the second half last week against Troy. And I think Clemson, they do win by a touchdown. Florida and number 3 LSU. Florida is looking to bounce back after being upset at home by South Florida last week. A Florida team that was sleepwalking in this matchup, which I anticipated they would do as they were looking ahead to this game, and it showed. They were completely undisciplined, especially in the final South Florida drive. One of their players on defense, inspired by Jalen Carter a couple nights ago, does what he does, gets a 15-yard penalty, and it helps South Florida complete the upset. And Billy Napier is back on the hot seat, as it looked like he was going to be let go by Florida after last season, but as the season ended, upset wins over Ole Miss and LSU kept him off the hot seat, and now he's back on it again. There were even chants after the game chanting, "Fire Billy, fire Billy." And for this game, I am interested to see what happens in this first quarter. Because what happens in this first quarter is going to be an indication of how the game is going to go. It's what I always look for in teams that had a very bad loss the week before. That first quarter in the next game, it always tells a lot. And maybe even the first part of the second quarter. By then, you have an indication of what kind of team that team will be, not only in that game in particular, but the rest of the season. If Florida competes well in this game to begin, then Florida, they may end up pulling off an upset or two just like they did last season. But if they find themselves down 28-0 middle of the second quarter, then the Florida season, in my opinion, may end up being a lost cause. But I was going to pick LSU regardless of what took place last week. It was noted that LSU, they didn't do as much as what people were hoping for. LSU, one of those teams you could say kind of sleepwalked in their week 2 matchup. But they did what they needed to do to win that game. LSU's defense, they shut out Clemson in the second half in week 1. And a big question mark for me was, will LSU's defense show improvement from the last couple of seasons? And they have so far, which to me, that makes them championship contenders. I was waiting to see what their defense would be like in the beginning of the season. But their defense looks great, and I think they're going to look great again against a Florida team that has shown that they are undisciplined at this early part of the season. And I think LSU wins this game very convincingly. 3 touchdowns at the minimum. As Florida, they just look lost right now. Number 18, South Florida, and number 5, Miami. South Florida is currently in the driver's seat to the college football playoff, being the highest ranked group of 5 team. And if they were to go on the road and upset Miami, upset another ranked opponent, I don't want to get too ahead, but if that were to happen, could we start having these conversations about should South Florida have an at-large bid? And I am going to feel like a broken record, as this is going to be the third consecutive week that I've made this statement. But South Florida's recent history of being competitive against ranked opponents in the Alex Golesh era. And by the way, it's only a matter of time until he gets a Power 4 coaching offer. And that includes last year's matchup against Miami. They led 15-14 in the second quarter in last year's matchup. However, Miami, they would go on to score 36 unanswered points and end up winning that game 50-14. And Miami is currently favored by 16.5 points. So if you're looking for Miami to cover, you need them to win, at least at this moment, by 17 points. And as much as I want to see South Florida go on the road and pull off yet another upset and just continue to cause chaos in this early portion of the college football season, they say that all good things must come to an end. And South Florida's run right now, it's the story of the college football season. And I think Miami, they win this game at the bare minimum by 20 points. Miami's defense, they have already shown that they are much improved. Last year, their defense was a liability. And without Cam Ward, they probably would have been a 7-5 team. But in week one, they contained Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in week one. And that was one of the big keys for me if Miami was going to win that game against Notre Dame, if they could contain the run. They did that and they won. The good Carson Beck also showed up. But I think even if Carson Beck doesn't play that great, I think Miami is still going to win this game. Am I going to be rooting for South Florida to prove me wrong? Of course. But do I think they're going to pull off another upset? No, I'm going to pick Miami. Number 16, Texas A&M, and number 8, Notre Dame. There were quite a bit of so-called college football influencers, late July, early August, talk about how Texas A&M is a playoff contender. And some predicted that they will make the playoff. One thing they pointed out was their defense and how their defense is going to improve a lot from last season with Mike Elko's second year at the helm. However, their defense has given up 23 a game in these first two games. Their defense allowed 203 rushing yards against UTSA. Last week against Utah State, 78, which you might say, well, that's not a lot. However, the defense had 6 sacks in the game, so a portion of it is sack yardage. But the offense has scored about 43 a game in the first two games of the season. Marcel Reed, he looks like he has a lot of upside this season. He did leave the game in the third quarter, but he is okay. Him sitting out of the fourth quarter was just to rest him up for this next game. And another thing they talked about was Casey Concepcion, the NC State transfer, and he has been a major impact in the offense already. Mario Craver has already been a go-to guy in this offense. But a big question for A&M in this game is, can they get the running game going of Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens? We've seen Amari Daniels and E.J. Smith get some touches in this offense. As something else was also talked about is how A&M was going to be one of the best rushing teams in the SEC, maybe even the entire country. And Notre Dame is off of a bye week. They had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. And some that stuck out to me in their week 1 matchup against Miami, Jeremiah Love only having 10 carries in that game. That is something that really surprised me, and it surprised a bunch of other people as well, to have your star running back only get 10 carries in your opening matchup. Last year's matchup between these two teams, it was essentially a runner's duel, as both quarterbacks, they didn't play the best. I talked about it throughout a portion of last season. And a big difference in the game was Connor Wegman, he played worse than Riley Leonard in that game. While Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, they combined for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns. They also averaged 6.1 yards per carry. And I've seen some people talk on some platforms about, is Notre Dame's season potentially on the line in this matchup? If Notre Dame were to lose this game and fall to 0-2 on the season, is their window to make the playoff, is it gone after just 3 weeks of the season? I honestly don't think it matters, because I think Notre Dame wins this game at the bare minimum by 2 touchdowns. I am just still not sold on A&M's defense. I think as long as Jeremiah Love, he gets double the carries that he got against Miami, I think Notre Dame will be fine in this game. And finally, the game of the week, number 6, Georgia, number 15, Tennessee. Georgia, they were one of those teams that you can argue they were sleepwalking in their game. While Tennessee, on the other hand, they were dominant in their game. Tennessee, they are 4th in the FBS in scoring offense so far, averaging 58.5 points per game. I did mention back in the week 1 best of the rest that I really felt like Joey Aguilar was a major upgrade at quarterback compared to Nico Iamaleava. And in these first 2 weeks of the season, I do think that that is completely correct, as I saw people underestimating Tennessee going into the season. I saw a lot of people say Tennessee's going to take a step back. They didn't get an upgrade at quarterback, as they just looked at Joey Aguilar from last year and only focused on last year. But the year before that, he threw, I think it was over 33 or 35 touchdowns to only 9 or 10 interceptions. And a couple things that I do want to note from this, for this game, Georgia has an 8-game winning streak against Tennessee. The last time Tennessee beat Georgia, it was Kirby Smart's first year as the Georgia head coach. And that game was Joshua Dobbs' Hail Mary pass to Jawan Jennings to win the game. But in those last 8 matchups, Georgia has dominated every single time. In the last 8 matchups, Tennessee has only averaged 13 points a game. But with this being Georgia's first true test of the season, their defense only given up an average of 6.5 points per game, but it's only been Marshall and Austin Peay. Georgia acquired Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas in the transfer portal in the offseason. For Georgia to not only win this game, but win games down the line, they have to start getting those two involved in the passing game. Georgia's 15th in run defense, while Tennessee, they are 19th in run offense. Tennessee is currently 8th in third down conversion percentage, converting on third down 65.4% of the time. And as I just mentioned, Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas both have to start getting involved in this passing game. And I do think that this game, they are going to start getting involved, because I do think that Georgia will be able to take advantage of Tennessee being down 2 starting corners. Tennessee is going to be without Jermod McCoy and Ricky Gibson. As much as I am sold on Joey Aguilar, as much as I do think this is Tennessee's best chance to beat Georgia since they last did in 2016, I just don't think I could pick Tennessee to beat Georgia until they actually do it. Because in the 8 games since 2017, Georgia 41-0. 2018, Georgia 38-12. 2019, Georgia 43-14. 2020, Georgia 44-21. 2021, Georgia 41-17. 2022, Georgia 27, Tennessee 13. 2023, Georgia 38-10. And last season, Georgia 31-17. I am going to pick Georgia to win this game. I do, however, think this is going to be the closest game that we've seen between these two teams since 2016. I think Georgia wins only by 10 at the most. And that will do it for my Week 3 college football predictions. Comment your predictions down below. Like, share, subscribe. My NFL predictions will be uploaded tomorrow. The best of the rest will be uploaded on Wednesday. My takeaways from week 2 will be on YouTube Shorts later on in the week. And that is all I have for today. Have a good one, and until next time.